Yeah, I just thought I'd invoke the SIGGRAPH 96 time machine here. So I'm down here at the Ernest Morrell Convention Center. We're right in the middle of our exhibition, and I'm speaking to you from 1996. Well, my name is John Fujii. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, Vancouver, Washington, specifically. I was born in Seattle. Grew up in the Vancouver, Portland area. I studied computer science at Yale University, along with graphic design, and then went on to do graduate work at the Ohio State University, ACAD, the Cranston Surrey group. And I was part of the Ohio Supercomputer Graphics Group. You know, Tom DeFani was there at Ohio State in the early days, and Tom was Chuck Surrey's first graduate, GRA, and I was Chuck Surrey's last GRA. My background actually started out as a real deep interest in film and photography. And that was all motivated because I thought I was going to go into what we now know as practical special effects. So I was a builder of models and photography and a lot of the analogs that were very much perfected in the digital realm. I was learning lithography, miniature photography, and model building, very much inspired by model railroading. Scrounging around in fan magazines and Cinefex issues. I had a fine art background, photography, interest in painting, impressionism, all of those kinds of things pointed me in a direction to go into fine arts and graphic design. At first, I'm learning about Dijkstraflex and all of the optical printing, which were very familiar to me from physical chemical photography. But the thing that catches my attention most is Larry Kuba's animation of the Death Star Trench. And that spins me off into a direction of seeking out, well, if I think we're going to go into that area, I better start learning something about this computing. So I go off to Yale and studied both graphic design. I kept up with the art side, but also did a full computer science degree there. SIGGRAPH happened to be in my backyard, Seattle, 1980, and I didn't even know it. It wasn't until I went to college that I encountered a graduate student who had the 1984 proceedings and was not going to let those go. So I photocopied their entire 1984 and 85 proceedings because suddenly I just accidentally overlapped with the notion of SIGGRAPH. We did our first crude animation back at Yale. My senior project partner, Will Evans, and I wrote a scanline renderer with Z-buffered shadows. I shot with a 16 millimeter Bolex right off of a computer screen, and that was how we did our first animation. I said, oh, I gotta do more of this, and that's why I went off to Ohio State and then had a lot of cross-disciplinary interaction with both computer science and the artists there, because I was from both of those tribes. Being at Ohio State, especially on the tail end of Chuck Surrey's career there, and all of the graphics professional from Cranston Surrey. So you had John Burton, you had Scott Dyer, Michael Gerard, Susan Amkraut, Joan Stavely, all of these wonderful artists and scientists, and we were churning out animations there that ultimately would show up in the SIGGRAPH film shows. And then I was also over in the computer science department, right? So I was studying with Wayne Carlson and Frank Crow and all of those folks over there. So I was able to take the entire computer graphics track over in the computer science department and do animation art, rendering art. In the old parlance, it was Computer Graphics Research Group. CGRG was the overlap. And then we became ACAD, the Advanced Center for Computing Design. But when we were CGRG, we were actually meeting in Cranston Surrey's space, and we students who are graduate students were using the tools and all of the computational resources there. They were teaching us first year graduate students on the original scene assembler software that was part of the Cranston Surrey suite of stuff, and we were doing our own programming and scripting, and we were also some of us were generating renderers and all sorts of things. Eventually did my graduate animation with Tom Benoit. It was a animation called Core Dump. And that was part of the SIGGRAPH Computer Animation Festival. Fast forward to the fact that I thought I was going to possibly end up in Hollywood, but I stopped off here in Fort Collins and actually joined the advanced rendering group for workstation graphics here at Hewlett-Packard at the time. That was 1989. Wrote particle systems for that. We were still working with VAX 780s and Sun Spark 4s. I mean, that was the degree of computation we could generate. Kind of a fun time in terms of animation development. Once I discovered that ACM SIGGRAPH even existed, I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to do this, but I couldn't afford to go to the conferences because I was doing my summer jobs to earn money to be in school. I eventually joined ACM SIGGRAPH in '86. I became a member then, but I wasn't able to actually go to an actual conference until '88. By that time, I was at Ohio State. I was with all of the other grad students and computer science students, and they were taking me by the hand and going to have the attendee experience at a conference. And in '88, that's when I got to see Particle Dreams. In '88, that was Atlanta. I knew that not only had I found the community that I wanted to be a part of, but I really wanted to get involved. And so I was an attendee both in '88 and '89. But I also became a contributor. I went through the contributor process, contributed animations, and got involved that way. And my first break into actually volunteering at the committee level was on Maxine Brown, SIGGRAPH 1992 out of Chicago. I joined her committee, and it was only by pure random luck and chance that I became connected with Maxine's event. At the very end of her forming her committee, she still needed at the time a technical slide sets chair. And the person that she wanted to bring on board was, I think, an HP sales office there near Chicago, but that person didn't feel she could contribute in the level that Maxine wanted to. So she said, you should really contact our graphics lab in Colorado. And so the word came back, and they looked around the lab and they said, John, would you like to volunteer? So I interviewed with Maxine, and then we found that I had this background with Tom DeFonte, through the Ohio State backstory, and I joined her committee as the technical slide sets chair. And that was where I began my career, at least starting to seriously volunteer with the SIGGRAPH organization. I was also the first SIGGRAPH information manager because Ralph Orlick and Ralph registered the SIGGRAPH.org domain, and we hosted a server out of Chicago, and we started building a presence for us on the internet. And so I served as the first information manager for SIGGRAPH.org. I became part of the 1994 conference, where I was actually treasurer for that conference. On the side, I also applied to be considered one of the conference co-chairs for SIGGRAPH 96. I was actually appointed by the SIGGRAPH EC at the time, along with Ray Elliott, and Ray Elliott and I started out as conference co-chairs. Ray dropped out, and I became the conference chair for SIGGRAPH 96. Had a wonderful time, wonderful committee. I went on to participate in other conference committees, including in SIGGRAPH 98 and SIGGRAPH 99. I really wanted to address the fact that in the earliest days, that 1988 conference, I had a very interesting experience. Not knowing anything about the conference itself, I went outside of the normal registration and booked a hotel based on economics. And so I was not in a conference hotel. I was in a Days Inn down the street, and I wasn't rooming with any of my other fellow graduate students. And so I had actually somewhat a very lonely experience. And when I compared my experience with the one that Scott Simpton had, that was his first conference too. He actually was there with someone who knew the ropes and was guided by that. And when we looked at the contrast of that experience, we agreed that we really needed to create a program called Pathfinders. Pathfinders was really intended to address the first-time attendee. If you had the original experience I had, I might not have come back. I might not have survived that. Back in that day, it was a papers and panels or courses registration. And you just went and you did your things. And if that was going to be the only experience you're going to have, it was not nearly as good as someone who knew the ropes. We really wanted to address that and really have kind of the earliest idea of kind of an onboarding. I was the technical courses chair in 2005. We did conference operations 2008, 2009. So I was on the EC for a year, served as a director at large and as the CAG chair. And then moved on to really trying to get back to lending some of my background back to the conference. And that's when I became part of the conference event photography staff. So back in 2011, I went back to my photographic roots with an educated eye, understanding what I was seeing. I helped document what was going on in our conferences. Here's just a little taste of SIGGRAPH 96 from August 96. We were in the Ernest Memorial Convention Center. So SIGGRAPH 96 was the first time we were in New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm going to jump down to the lower right-hand corner first and really acknowledge the notion of we. We did a wonderful conference because without both the conference committee that I had, the volunteers, the city, the contributors, that's the wonderful magic about a SIGGRAPH conference is that it is bigger than any one person can put on. And so I want to really do a shout out and thank you to all of the contributors and all of the attendees of our conference in 96, because without you, it wouldn't have been as magical. We had our visual identity. It was manifest there in the wonderful work of our general contractor. We had these wonderful ribbon balloons that you see that went through the entire front hall. They all collected right there at the beginning of the exhibition. And so that really tied together a whole spatial feel. Our keynote speaker was Douglas Adams, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. In fact, he got totally rushed after his keynote because all of the enthusiasts just rushed the stage to greet him. Warm and wonderful individual, but he didn't prepare any of his notes beforehand. He spoke directly to it, and so we didn't know exactly what we were going to get, but it was wonderful. Dropping down to the next row there, the reason that I want to bring this out is this was Barbara Meyer's presentation. This is the paper session. This is what we believe is the absolutely first remote presentation of a technical paper at a SIGGRAPH conference, because Barbara Meyer was just this close to having her baby, and so she couldn't fly. And so her employer, Disney and ABC, hooked up a satellite link so she could have a remote presentation. This predates Zoom. It predates all of this stuff. And so this was at the time the first remote technical paper presentation that had happened at a SIGGRAPH conference. We had to have trucks and satellite uplinks, and we didn't even know if it was going to work until this last paper presentation. Her paper, which was about non-photorealistic rendering, again appealed to the impressionist aficionado that I was in my art background. So it was the only paper I got to see at my conference, but it happened to be hers, and I loved it. We had the whole Cajun and Louisiana culture into it, but we were able to, for example, our art show, which was called The Bridge, had both installations in their contemporary art center, which was off-site, and actually in the convention center. So Jeannie Bolito, my art show chair, had a wonderful art show presentation and experience that were in two parts of New Orleans proper. Another thing we had was this classic theater here for the Computer Animation Festival. Linda Brannigan, our CAF chair, got to use the classic Sanger Theater. You went into this theater, you could look up, there were paintings on the ceilings. It was just a really wonderful experience. The Sanger doesn't even exist anymore. They had a great behind the scenes session for the Computer Animation Festival, because up until that point, I believe there was a lot of mystery about how there was selection for the electronic theater and the animation festival. And so she really tried to create an environment which helped people understand what went on into the jury process. What were you seeing? Why was it significant? Digital Bayou, the emerging technology program for SIGGRAPH 96 was a wonderful immersive experience. In fact, one of the proud moments that I have is down here on the last row center, which was this individual was going through a VR experience. This was a Star Wars themed lightsaber. You're immersed and fighting a droid or whatever, but this individual could have that immersive experience in the digital bayou, even from his wheelchair. That is a wonderful moment. Clark Dodsworth and Brian Blau and their committee did wonderful things with the digital bayou. We really wanted to bring in the Louisiana Bayou theme into the convention center. We suddenly had to realize that we were going to have to deal with the fire marshal. That committee had to suddenly find fire retardant moss. We had great receptions, and SIGGRAPH 96 had 2 receptions. One was a classic one, and the other one was on riverboats. Not only was the reception on riverboats, but we had hired a high school band, and we went down Canal Street. We had a traditional Mardi Gras band parade down Canal Street and ended up at the riverboat reception. The next picture that's to the right of that is just kind of showing what our internet room was of the day. We provided workstations, donated workstations. People could access things. I mean, at this point, Google doesn't even exist. I don't think Google existed until 97, 98. I think people were having to search the internet through Alta Vista or Yahoo. We wanted to make sure that the internet and all of its trappings were available to our attendees, and so we provided that amenity as well. This is our exhibition. Our exhibition had almost 158,000 net square feet of exhibitors. I was coming from industry. I straddle a lot of things, but I was also there as representative of Hewlett Packard and all of the high-end rendering and engineering. We wanted to acknowledge the scientific visualization, GIS, cartography, all of those kinds of applied art. And I think the exhibition was one of those things that helped not only people to go there and have the interactions that they were going to have in New Orleans, but they were going to be able to have hands-on experiences with the latest state-of-the-art technology. The exciting thing about SIGGRAPH 96, it's about the people, it's about the connections, it's about interacting and having meaningful, hands-on kinds of experiences and exchanges, and just the fun, the magic and excitement that you have when you're sharing it in common with others around you that share the same appreciation of the magic. And so that's what we tried to do, and I think we delivered that